morning, everyone. This is Bring It In, True Hoops Show. And I think we started. The news of today is super producer Judy is not here today. So I'm producing the show. Everything's going to go wrong, but we'll be fine. David Thorpe is here and esteemed guest Maria Konnikova. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to read you your bio.
Okay.
Maria Konnikova is the author of The Biggest Bluff, which is out tomorrow. She's a regular contributing writer for The New Yorker, has written for The Atlantic, New York Times, Slate, The New Republic, The Paris Review, The Wall Street Journal, Salon, The Boston Globe, and Scientific American, Wired, The Smithsonian, and many other publications. Her writing has won numerous awards, including the 2019 Excellence in Science Journalism Award from the Society of Personality and Social Psychology. While researching The Biggest Bluff, Maria became an international poker champion and a winner of over $300,000 in tournament earnings. Maria also hosts the podcast The Grift from Panoply Media and is currently a visiting fellow at NYU School of Journalism. That's where I went to school, by the way. Her podcasting work earned her a National Magazine Award nomination in 2019. Maria graduated from Harvard University and received her PhD in psychology. I joked a PhD from BS from Columbia University. Wow.
I'll take it. I wish I had a PhD in BS. That would be pretty wonderful.
I feel like you kind of do. Like, you know a lot about BS, right?
You left out the best. You left out the most interesting part of Maria.
Sherlock Holmes book?
She thought that your name was Henry Hoop. After following you on Twitter, she was telling a friend that she found this guy that's interesting and his name is Henry Hoop. Our participants are going to be very excited.
I couldn't remember.
Randy,
I couldn't remember Henry's name.
Yes.
And I was talking to our mutual friend, David Epstein, who has been on the podcast and is a wonderful writer. And I was saying, I've found this great sports person. I think it would be interesting to do something with him. And David asked me, what's his name? I know everyone in sports because he does. And I said, Henry Hoop. I remembered the last name, and he just burst out laughing and said, "Henry Abbott is who you mean." That was a fun moment. So guys, we should all be calling Henry Hoop from now on.
We are
it's
going
a good name.
That's fine.
It's a good name. It's such great alliteration.
Do I have to change my kids' names and stuff too? Like, is that?
Well, it depends. I think it's okay. I think the kids can stay.
Okay. It's funny. There's a funny little thing happening, which is like your bio has every accomplishment and area of study that I've ever heard of. But that the average listener is like, ooh, $300,000. I should pay attention. Right? Like,
it's true. It's true. Most people are like, wow, and how long did it take you? And when I say, well, it was about 2 years from the first time I played. From my first result to the last one, that's what they find impressive. But I have to say, let me just make myself a little bit less impressive. Okay. It's not actually 300,000 in earnings. The Hendon Mob, which is what tracks tournament results, doesn't track all those tournaments I played where I didn't cash, that I still had to pay for. It doesn't track my travel. It doesn't track how expensive it is to fly to Macau. And to play there and to stay there for 2 weeks. So it's not quite as impressive in reality as it sounds.
Are you the only poker player who would tell us that part? Isn't everybody else just like, well, that doesn't matter?
I think my mentor, Eric Seidel, who's one of the greatest players, I think, to have ever played the game, I think he would tell you that too. He is very open about it. And he's the one who taught me from just day one that the most important thing that I have to keep in mind as I start this, I mean, there are lots of most important things. A lot of them are the number one most important, but bankroll management. Don't play higher than you can afford. Make your way up organically. You're not allowed to play high buy-ins until you start doing well at a lower buy-in point. And it was so valuable because I didn't quite understand just how important that is and how many poker players go broke multiple times because they're able to find someone to bail them out. I wonder what other businesses work that way. And then they do it again and again.
It's a brilliant thing. There's like poker, as you explained, is kind of a lab for decision making in a very sort of magical way. And I'm going to go straight to this little quote. Well, it's a perfectly sized quote, I guess. It's a fine, a regular sized quote. You talk about, you have to commute to New Jersey to gamble online, which is hilarious in and of itself. And then you record the session, you take it back to Manhattan, and you watch it with Eric Seidel, who's kind of a Yoda-like figure in the book, I guess.
He is, yes.
And there's this little, you make a mistake, and then he explains why, and then you write this. Well, then you add that you've also studied military campaigns, which is amazing. Before any campaign, or indeed even minor military action, you need to evaluate the situation, the territory, the nature of the enemy. You can't just plow ahead with one strategy because it worked in the past, or you've seen someone else employ it successfully. Each time you act, you have to reassess based on what is now known versus what was known before. You need to have a process, a system, a plan, one that evolves with feedback. If you don't, how will you know whether the outcome of your battle, a bad one in my case, but successful ones too, is the result of skill or luck? Dun, dun.
Yes.
That's a thinking fast and slow thing, right? That's a...
Yeah. No, so yeah, when I was an undergrad, I studied with two wonderful Stevens. From the psychology angle, Steven Pinker, and from the politics angle, Stephen Rosen, who is famous for being one of the leading minds in military theory. And he had us read all of these classics. Not just the Peloponnesian Wars, which are very relevant right now because they went through a plague and that wiped out a lot of the city and wiped out democracy partly, but also Sun Tzu's Art of War and Clausewitz's On War. And I hadn't really thought about those books forever. I mean, for over a decade, because that's not what I write about. I don't write about political science. My PhD was in psychology, and I loved that part of my background, but had kind of left it behind. And then all of a sudden, here I am at the poker table, or the virtual poker table at the beginning, which, New Jersey, I'm so sorry for all of the bad things I say about you always, but I just can't help myself. But I would reverse commute multiple days a week. And as I was doing it, I would say, I'm going to New Jersey again. But there was a part of my book that actually a few people told me to cut out before the final, so it didn't make it in. And it was some nasty comments from the past. It was this writer writing in the early 1900s about New Jersey as a cesspool of humanity, and I cut it out. So
I'm there right now.
And I'm going there in 2 weeks to play the WSOP online.
Okay.
So I have embraced New Jersey.
Yeah.
I've fully embraced New Jersey. All of the bad references were cut out. All of them. But anyway.
Clean. It's clean now. It's fine.
It's clean. It's clean. Yeah. And so I would reverse commute and start playing and enter this world, which was much more zero-sum than anything I'd encountered previously. Now, as I spent more time in it, I realized that it's actually very positive sum if you think about it as an ecosystem over the long term. But any one game is zero-sum, right? I win, you lose. You win, I lose. Those chips ain't going to split themselves. They're going to one of us. And so all of a sudden, I had this realization when I was talking to Eric that actually a lot of the military theory that I studied applies here, that a lot of it is like battle strategy. Because, poker in many ways is like war. You want to win. However, you don't want to win at all costs, because that way, that's very short-sighted. That way, you're not going to actually lose the war. You might win the battle, but you're not going to win the war. You might actually lose if you just go all out on every single assault. And you do need to be very smart about it. You do need to think ahead. You do need to understand your opponents. You need to figure out your strategy. And, it's a cliche in military history that people are always fighting the last battle, but it's a cliche for a reason. It's true. A lot of we prepare for the last war, not the next one oftentimes. And the best commanders, the best leaders, the best generals, they're the people who try to think, well, what might the world look like? And they don't often get it wrong. They don't often get it right because it's hard, right? It's really hard to predict what the future is going to look like or what a future campaign is going to look like. But at least they're open-minded. At least they're open to that possibility. And so what they do have going for them is this ability to change rapidly and to actually figure out, okay, how do I adjust? Sure, this doesn't look exactly like what I thought it was going to look like, but I need to adjust now. I can't just keep executing the strategy I came in with. And what I learned from Eric Seidel is that the best poker players adjust constantly. It's just this constant process of adjusting, of figuring out what am I doing wrong? What have I done wrong? How do I change? What am I doing right? What are my opponents doing wrong? How do I understand where I actually am situated? And as I started to adapt a lot of that vocabulary that I hadn't really thought about for a long time into my poker playing, it actually helped. And it also helped me realize that, I'm a really shitty commander, and that I don't really know much yet. And so
$300,000.
this was at the beginning. My earnings were negative at that point. And so it was something where, you really have to take the time to just slow down and reflect. Something, this gift that Eric gave me is that even online, even when you have, this time pressure. And by the way, when I was in grad school, I had people play these stock market games and I would give them little counters with time pressure. And now that I was experiencing it myself as I played poker, I felt so bad for them. I thought, oh my God, poor people, what did I do to you? This is really, it's stressful. And I was so mad. I mean, I still think that timer is evil because you just see it going and you see your time bank running down and you think, but I want more time to think. But what Eric taught me is that even in those situations, you can always afford to just pause for a few seconds and let your mind think through the options so that you never act reflexively, so that you always think through all of the possibilities. So it's never like, oh, well, I'm going to raise, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. Think, stop and think, because sometimes that will make you avoid a huge strategic blunder.
That's very much basketball strategy, Henry, right? You're talking, I'm curious though, have you ever played or studied chess, and is it similar to poker? Because we often compare, as a coach, compare what coaches are doing in terms of strategy to chess and basketball.
I did play chess very briefly. I was in 4th grade and I'm a Russian Jewish immigrant. And so my parents decided that they were going to sign me up for a chess club because that's what Russian Jewish girls do. And I went to my chess club and I had one lesson. And then I was paired up to play with a kindergartner who was 5 years old. And he beat me in 4 moves. And that was the last time I played chess.
This is a stupid game.
So, but to answer your question, so there's a big difference between chess and poker. There's a reason. So I actually came to poker through the work of John von Neumann, who's one of the founders of game theory. And he goes into this, and he thought he didn't like chess at all. He thought that it was boring because it was a game of mathematics, and that's it, because it's a game of perfect information. You can see the board, you can see all of the pieces, and there's always a correct move. And if you give me enough computing power, and this guy was inventing the computer at the time, so he's like, I'll get there, I'll have the computing power. I can tell you how to move. There's a right answer. And he, at the same time as he was inventing the computer, he was also working on the hydrogen bomb. So one of the, total polymath, just, yeah, exactly. So this is a guy who's just like created so much of the 20th century. And so he's involved in all of these high-level strategic negotiations. And he says, that's not chess. There's never a right move. You never know there's no certainty there. There's incomplete information. And that's poker. And he thought, that's why I actually love poker. That was von Neumann. He loved poker. He was a poker player. And so the reason that he loved poker was that it was a game of incomplete information. It was a game of people. And he has this wonderful quote that I'm going to misquote, but I quote it correctly in the book. And it's something along the lines of, real life consists of bluffing, of little tactics of deception, of figuring out, what does this man think I mean to do? And that is what games are about in my theory. So just think about how complex it is. It's not just me deceiving, it's you deceiving. It's me figuring out, well, what do you know about me? What do I know about you? Okay, well, do you know that I know? And do I know that you know? And does that now change? We can go back and forth until our brains break. But that's what makes it so fascinating. And that's why von Neumann fell in love with the game of poker. There you go.
Do you know this?
No, I don't.
So we had this guest, Jeff Asher, who's a former CIA analyst, and he basically just read this book. This is what you want. And like a CIA analyst training manual. It's really for practical applications of the research that you have read, right? But it's kind of a how-to. And he talks about, it's like putting the puzzle together where you can't see the picture on the box.
Yeah.
trying to just fill in what you can.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And poker, just right away, any notion you have of perfect information or, well, if I make the right decision, then everything's going to work out, it just goes out the window. It just knocks that straight out of you, because what you start realizing is that, first of all, there is no such thing as complete information. There's such a thing as informational advantage. So this kind of goes back to military theory, right? So how can I actually, sorry, there's
Definitely my fault. Yeah, it's definitely my fault. Hold on, I got this.
there, all right.
Don't worry.
Perfect. So there's definitely, you want to try to get as much information as possible. So that's why you want the math, because that's information, but you also want to pay attention to the people. You want to just figure out, how do I get an edge over you? That's why position is so important in poker, which means you act last. So it's undervalued. And even though people scream at you, position, 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 I have just so many poker players undervalue it because they want to play hands and they get bored and they forget, just you don't want to play out of position because you don't have the informational advantage. They do, and you want that edge. But anyway, so that's just to say that it's important to have it, but it's never going to be complete. It's never going to be enough, and you're going to have to make the best decision you can, knowing that you're never going to know everything, and that even if you make the best decision you can right now, the scenario is going to change with the next card. And no one can predict that either. There's no way, unless you're cheating and marking the deck, there's no way of knowing which card is going to come next. And so the entire strategy might suddenly change because it might be the one card that you didn't want to see. And all of a sudden you have to completely reevaluate it. And the hand is now totally different. And you can also get all of your money in. So you're done making decisions because, it was no limit hold'em. At any point you can get everything in the middle. And so you can do that. But then if there are still cards to come, you might have gotten your money in as a favorite, then the cards can still go against you. Does that mean you made the wrong decision? Absolutely not. You shouldn't keep making that decision over and over, because eventually variance is going to even out. But in the immediate term, it doesn't. And so poker just really knocks all of those notions out of your head. You will never know everything, and there's no such thing as certainty. And no, you cannot predict what the outcome is going to be. All you can do is make the best decision you can. The outcome is going to be what it's going to be, and it has nothing to do. You can make a shitty decision and suck out and win, and you can make a really good decision and be sucked out on and lose.
I
don't know poker terms, but that sounds amazing.
When you talk about boredom, though, fighting boredom, it reminds me of the scene in Rounders, which I'm sure you've seen.
You see Randy's cousin? It's like, people always ask you about Rounders.
Oh, there you go. where Malkovich talks about kid having alligator blood. And it's something that we deal with a lot in coaching. The best players in the world don't get bored making shots in practice. It's a very important point. Young players will make 5 or 6 in a row, or 10 or 15 of 18, and they want to move on. The veteran guys shot, and I would say the same thing in our gym to young players, don't get bored making shots. It's not boring missing shots because you're trying to start making them, but you've still got to groove the good habits. And so the great ones just make it and make it and make it, and they can do it forever.
Yes.
They know how valuable that it is. But you said something else about slowing down that is so vital, not just to basketball, but to life. The great golf instructor, Harvey Penick, who inspired me to write the book that I wrote, he teaches players when they're playing in the rain, driving rain, they're soaked and muddy, and they're in a major, maybe a U.S. Open. And what do I do when I'm in that position? He always says, you want to speed up because you're miserable. You want to get over with. Slow down. Don't get back into your groove. Don't rush it. Take your time. Be mindful of the moment. Factor in the rain, the wind, the mud. Slow down. And Henry told a story 2 weeks ago to me. He got in a little bike accident, and the first thing he did, impressively, was he just, instead of panicking, oh my God, I hit my head, slow down. Where am I at here? Can I think? How's my head doing? Where am I bleeding? Brilliant. Other people might have panicked.
I had done that before I wrecked. That would have been brilliant.
Well, that's like poker, right? You got to figure it out on the fly. There's variance, but it's great advice on just slowing down as best you can, anyway.
Well, absolutely.
Adam Silver's in this today, so he's the commissioner of the NBA, and they're going to reopen in Florida at the end of the month, in July. One of the teams will be flying there is scheduled for today, but now they're in this now that's a poker hand where more cards are showing, and suddenly maybe you don't want to bet, right? Like the Florida case count is, it takes sort of radical acceptance, I think, to just sort of keep taking this in and keep making
absolutely. It's so difficult. And I think it's a really great example, because so many times, and I think that people aren't rewarded for actually being smart about this in public life, because they say, oh, well, you're inconsistent. You changed your mind. This is terrible. This is bad. Like you're wishy-washy. No, it's actually, it can be so incredibly powerful to change your mind. What that means is you're taking in new information, you're learning. That's what wisdom looks like. Right. That's what being intelligent looks like. And yet, for public figures, oftentimes they just get these huge backlashes from the public. And so, when new information comes in, you have to be willing to say, actually, we can't do this anymore, but you have to be willing to take shit for it, because right now the world is changing so rapidly, and people are yelling at the CDC and the WHO for all of their bad recommendations. And they did mess up a few times, and I mean more than a few times, and they messed up on phrasing, and they messed up on a lot of stuff. But now, people are like, well, you told me I didn't need to wear a mask before, so I'm not going to wear it. Now you're saying it, I do, but what if tomorrow you say I don't? Well, they're giving us the best information. And so now, it doesn't mean don't wear masks because once upon a time you heard don't wear masks. Right. It means actually be willing to do this. So I think in Silver's case, it's so important to think, okay, we were planning to bring it back then. That was the plan, but I need to be able to cancel my plan as if the world shifts. And the world is shifting. I mean, make no mistake about it. Right now, our numbers are horrifying.
Yeah. So David and I have been friends in basketball forever. And we have this sort of recurring theme of like, basketball is the most male entity out there, basically. And like a lot of the decisions that are bad are macho ones, right? Mm-hmm. And so I read you had an op-ed in the New York Times yesterday, and if Judy were controlling the Zoom right now, she would show it to everybody, but we're just going to skip but in the print version, so this is here, and it's this brilliant articulation of how decisions go awry. And then I turn the page, and the very next op-ed on the same page is by Lyndon Crawford about supplementing testosterone. So literally, like, they inject testosterone, and then I'm going to read to you this little paragraph, which, oh, wait, is this happening? Is Judy here? Oh my God, it's like a miracle.
Judy's here.
What's happening? Judy, welcome back. So great to have you here. Okay, so this is Maria's great story. And then the next page says this. This is what happens after injecting testosterone. I feel it in my chest, a sort of inflation or inflammation, like a dog with its hackles up, or a person just before a sneeze. Where I customarily talk myself down, now I talk myself up. This actually matters. I should do something about it. I must do something about it, which is where it veers away from irritability and begins to feel like justified anger, like desire. Anger is a feeling I've been afraid of, a feeling that did not seem worth having. But anger is intrinsically troubling, a troubling of stasis and complacency, a call to action, a demand for change, urging us to brave discomfort in order to reach a better place. I'm grateful to be more in touch with my anger, but also outraged that my sense of entitlement, such a basic emotion, correlates with the amount of testosterone in my bloodstream. Anger rises up in me for all the years that I couldn't allow it, and some days it overwhelms me. I do find it harder to cry. I feel the impulse, but it peters out before it reaches my tear ducts. There seems to be a thicker layer of insulation between my emotional core and my surface, and sometimes I struggle to identify my internal state. I worry that my sensitivity is dulled. How about that?
Yeah, I think it's so funny that they were back to back. And, one of the things that poker teaches you is got to be really careful of what your emotions are telling you and what your gut is saying. And unless you have a very good reason to trust your gut, which means that it's not actually your gut, but just decades of expertise and experience and pattern recognition that you might not be able to consciously identify at the moment. Otherwise, ignore the damn thing. But it's so, it's so powerful. And poker is also very male. And it's 97% male, 3% female. So it's a huge gender
It's you and Annie Duke, basically.
Well, Annie hasn't played poker for over a decade.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, she's long retired.
There you go. So it's just you.
No, there are a few wonderful women in the game, but not many of us.
Yeah.
And it's one of these things where, you know, you can go days without meeting another female. And so I actually have thought a lot about testosterone and decision making, and I think this is true. So when I was in grad school, I told you I did stock market games, and I worked a lot with kind of that world. And in poker, and there you see actually testosterone effects, that women sometimes make better decisions and are able to kind of calmly rationalize things better because we don't have those testosterone swings.
Wait a second. Sometimes?
I'm trying to be diplomatic here.
No,
you don't have to be diplomatic
it's
here.
fine. This is a safe place to make fun of testosterone.
You're in a safe place.
It's fine.
So, and so you can see I actually have a part of my book where I reference this phrase, and I had referenced it in my dissertation defense as well, because it made such a huge impression on me, that I steal with full credit, from Michael Lewis, from his first book, which was memoiristic, called Liar's Poker, which has nothing to do with poker. It's a game played on the trading floor.
Right in my office right there.
It's a wonderful book.
Great book.
It's a wonderful book, but Michael Lewis introduces this concept there that he learned on the training floor, and the concept is big swinging dicks. And he says, you know, they're the big swinging dicks. These are the guys who can get away with murder, basically. And he really wants to be a big swinging dick. Yeah. And you just see big swinging dicks in poker everywhere. And you realize that big swinging dicks, if you don't realize that they're swinging and that it's the testosterone speaking, they're going to bully you over because they have so much. They're, you know, it's like what you were just reading, you know, they have this confidence, but it's false confidence. It's this confidence that's coming, but it can be very powerful if you're not ready for it, right? It can be, I've let it make me fold a hand many times when I probably shouldn't have, because they were just so compelling. But they can also, you know, they can also go very wrong because they are being governed by these kind of emotional things. And
it's got to be a great opponent to have, right? This is when you call your friends and say, let's go gamble against the big
absolutely
dick, right?
Absolutely. You want the big swinging dicks in the game once you realize what's going on. And I kind of wanted to be one myself too, you know, but without the testosterone. So I could see, okay, how do I take the good part of this, which is learning to project confidence, right? Because one of the things poker teaches you is it really is a game of incomplete information. No one can see your cards. It's so easy to just project, and like, they all know I'm card dead. They all know I have nothing, and they don't. Right. The only thing they see is you. So take that part of it, but then remove the part that makes them want to prove that they're the big swinging dick over and over and over, which makes them make bad decisions. In poker, there's this term known as tilt, which means I've let emotions into my decision-making process. And it's a wonderful word that I now use all the time in my everyday life, because it can be used as every part of speech. I'm tilted. I'm on tilt. This tilts me. I'm finding him very tilting. Oh my God, can you believe that guy? Like, he's the most tilting human being I've ever met. You know, it's so great.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's getting to you, you know, it's kind of getting under your skin. And what it means is emotion is being injected into that logical process. You're no longer able to slow down the way that you should. You're letting the wrong things affect your decisions. You think, yeah, I deserve this. I want this pot. You know, it's mine. I've earned it. And you don't, it actually screws with your ability to filter out correct and incorrect information, and to actually recalibrate, to do all of these things that we've been talking about, to slow down, to think about, okay, what does the world actually look like right now? And it's a huge skill to be able to identify this in yourself. And by the way, women tilt too. Everyone tilts. Like, that's just part of being human. And you're never going to be able to eliminate that. But what you can do is learn to identify what makes you tilt, kind of how you respond emotionally to different situations, and then discount it. Because you have to realize that when an emotion is incidental, has nothing to do with the situation at hand, that means that you shouldn't use it to make your decision. And yet we do it all the time, and it makes us feel justified. It makes us, well, this guy's an asshole. You know, I'm going to show him he's just a jerk. Like, I'm going to get him. It's such a gift to me when I see that dynamic happening at the table, like when two guys are going at each other, because I know that they're both getting to each other, and I can take both of their chips and try to take advantage of that dynamic. But in order to do that, you have to learn to step outside of it yourself. And by the way, I've been on tilt. I've been knocked out of tournaments because guys have gotten under my skin. I've had to learn to figure out, how do I identify when it's happening? How do I try to stop it before it happens? The best, I don't remember how much they cost. Somewhere between $100 and $200 I ever spent was Bose noise canceling headphones, because they enabled me to claim control over my space so that I no longer had to react and respond to the guys who were putting me on tilt. I did that after one tournament where there was this guy who called me little girl over and over from the moment I sat down at the table. And he's like, hey, little girl, like, does your husband play? Is that why you're here? And like, just over for like multiple hours. And then finally he knocked me out of the tournament because I was just like, I just boiled over at some point, and it was awful. And I got so mad at myself because I was like, man, I let him get to me. I let those little girls, I thought I was so playing it cool.
You have to go slash his tires, right?
Oh my God.
That's why he did it.
Exactly. He was smart. Yeah. It was very smart on his part. And I was so mad at myself. I wasn't mad at him. I mean, I wanted to slap him, but that's a different story. But like, I was more mad at me that I let it get to me. And it was hard. He's definitely, he was doing it over and over in every hand. You have a big hand, little girl, like, oh my God. And just little girl. And I've been called a bitch. I've been called a cunt. I've been called like lots of things. That little girl just
When I was growing up, I'm a much older Eastern immigrant. My Jewish guy, my family came from there a long time ago. And in the 70s, there were lots of Holocaust survivors, and they would come to our Sunday school temple. And I was always amazed at how they could get through life after going through that for decades. And some of them probably are still doing that, not as many as there were. Because they had to let that anger go. They had to let that fear go. And they would speak about it sometimes. I was relatively young, but I was always amazed. How are they not afraid of everything? Or how are they not angry at everything? They lost everything, as you know. And there's a lot to be learned from that. And you can't let people prick you a little bit with a comment. Or in basketball, we've formed defenses to try to take advantage of mostly younger, very, very talented. Well, Henry knows Russell Westbrook's one of the most athletic players of all time. And defenses are created sometimes to take advantage of his alpha maleness and his athleticism.
Put him on tilt.
Invite him to go somewhere. He's coming. And that's exactly where they want him to go. The veteran is like, no. I know what you're doing. I'm going to play over here. That's part of experience. You learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you need to figure out, what it's so important to actually sit down. And I actually worked with a mental game coach who started off working with professional athletes, and then picked up poker players as well, because he realized, these worlds are actually very, very similar. Yeah. And he helped me so much. So first of all, acknowledging that I needed him was a huge step, because I was like, I have a PhD in psychology. I don't need a mental game coach. Like, come on, I know this stuff. Yeah. And at some point, after a few of these little girl situations, I was like, maybe I need some help. So he actually made me do the hard work that I never wanted to do, which was to sit down and to actually I filled in spreadsheets for him that were like, okay, these are the triggers that I have. And it forced me to actually go through the last tournament I played and try to figure out, okay, where were all of the moments that, I started getting emotional. And then I had to do it, prospectively during a tournament and figure out, okay, now let's go through each one and figure out, how do we respond? How do we deal with it? How do we learn, what it does to us, so that we can, in the moment, step down and take a step back and emotionally distance ourselves and have all of these techniques to make it stop, so that it's not actually going into our decision process. But I need to go a step further and realize that some of those things will get under my skin no matter what. And so I need to try to prevent them to begin with. So something like the noise canceling headphones wasn't just great at blocking out the little girls. It was great at if I see someone who looks like he might be one of those, I just put them on right away, because all of a sudden the social obligation, and as a female, it's much stronger. No one's going to yell at like the jacked guy sitting, you know, in the next seat, hey, I'm talking to you. Like, unless they want to fight, they're not going to do that. They do that to me all the time.
Yeah.
You know, why aren't you responding? You're a female. You're supposed to respond. I'm being nice here. You know, I'm offering you a drink, girl. Like, who are you not to respond? And this happens all the time. And so you just put on those headphones ahead of time to prevent that situation, because now there's no social obligation for you to interact to begin with. And by the way, you still hear it, but because there's no pressure, it doesn't actually create that dynamic, which is what then puts you on tilt. And so learning to do those things proactively was also immensely helpful. And my mental coach would give me routines, you know, things to do on breaks, sometimes, you know, when to step away, actually physically step away from the table, all of these things to help me manage it. And I think it's so important to realize that we all need it, that it's going to happen, that there's no way to prevent it from happening. But yeah, like if you know what your opponents are going to try to do to destabilize you, you know, you get in the zone where they can't reach you.
Do you use these same techniques in life? You know, like when a president gets you upset, or some kind of, you know,
couldn't happen.
Whatever. Do you use the same techniques?
Yes, it often really helps. And that kind of self-editing is really important. You have no idea how many tweets I've written and deleted. So I have a really good policy of, you know, writing the tweet and then just pausing before I hit send. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, that thing gets deleted, because I try to then think about, okay, how is the me next week going to feel about the fact that this is out in the world? And that's a very powerful way of just saying, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be tweeting this right now. And so when I do, I think I try to be much more logical, so that people can't attack me for being irrational. So that instead of reacting when I'm tilted by, you know, a hypothetical leader of a country, you know, I'll take the time and, you know, write an in-depth analysis and then do that instead.
I want to hear the story. I'm sorry, Henry. I know you have a question. I just have a quick story.
Yeah, do it.
When you use the same little girl strategy against the jacked guy or the schmuck or whatever, do you ever do that?
Yeah.
Get in their heads. How do you do it? What do you do?
Well, once I realize what they think of women, so poker players, especially as they get at every level, they don't want to admit it, but especially at higher levels, they will fight you to the death on this. When you say that they use gender stereotypes in making their decisions, they're like, no, I play GTO, game theory optimal. I use game theory. I don't care who you are. I'm going to play the same against you as I do against a wall. Well, that's so helpful to me if they truly believe that, because it's not true. It's never true. I mean, every single person has biases, and it filters the way you see the world. It filters the way you see information, and you need to acknowledge them. You need to figure out what they are so that you can then discount them and not act on them, right? Because they happen. There's not a single human being out there who doesn't have this. 0. Babies start showing it at 5 months old.
Wow.
So this is something that's really wired into how we see the world. So I think that it's so crucial to try to figure out, okay, how do they see women? Because they see me as a female first and as a poker player second, mostly because there's so few women in the game. Right. And when I sit down, I'm a girl. I'm a little girl. and so you need to figure that out. And once you can figure it out, you use it against them, and you can use it to win all of their chips.
How?
So, you know, so there are the people who can't stand being bluffed by a female, you know, and they will never fold, basically. And so good. You just bet relentlessly, and you never bluff them. But then if at some point, like, they realize that you just always have it, that's the moment where you bluff them and show the bluff. And then they will just totally lose their shit.
They go on tilt.
And go on tilt. Yeah. But you can play around with it and just try to figure out, you know, how do you see me? Do you think I should be at this table, or do you think I should be washing dishes in a kitchen somewhere? You know, do you think I'm capable of bluffing? Because some people think, oh, women aren't capable of bluffing. So if she's betting big, that means she has to have a really strong hand. Thank you. I love it. You know, I'm going to bluff you relentlessly. You know, some people, you know, think that women bluff all the time because they can't bear the thought that a woman would ever pull one over on you.
Right.
And some people think that, they can bully me and make me fold anything. So with them, I will fold many, many times. And then I'll wait till I have a really strong hand, because they're incapable of noting that information, and they will not adjust accordingly. And so I'll get all of their chips eventually, and I'm fine losing a few pots along the way.
But you're never talking shit to them?
No. I have, to me, something that I believe very strongly is I don't want to put negative energy out there, whether it's at the poker table or on Twitter or anywhere else. I always try to keep it positive and try not to get drawn into any sort of nasty name calling, because it's not productive. Like at the poker table, you're sitting there for hours. Like, have fun. You're playing a game. You're making money playing a game, for God's sake. Like, smile. And if you're not smiling, what are you even doing here? If you're miserable, why in the world are you doing this?
They always
it's not
look
easy
on TV.
Yeah. And this is not easy. It's not an easy way to make a living. This is hard work. This is exhausting. Why are you doing it if you don't enjoy it? And so I'm a big believer in not to ever go down to that level. So no, I don't talk shit to them.
I think we're all a little disappointed because we want to hear you talking. So for a different project, long story, but I spent forever. Actually, the best way to tell it is I went to PutinCon, which was amazing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm sorry, what?
PutinCon, Maria. It's the coolest thing. Everybody should go there.
Is it like Comic-Con? Do you all dress like Putin?
Pretty much.
Here's an idea. Henry Hoops, look into it.
Yeah. No, it was it was organized by Garry Kasparov, and it was in a 2-level basement beneath Manhattan with all of these incredible, people from intelligence agencies, dissidents, and on and on. Who. It was really amazing. All day, great conference. And when one of the things that really struck me was how the sort of propaganda worked. And I promise to connect this to what you're talking about in a second. So basically, Putin polled very badly, and so they just did. At every moment of Putin's presidency, there was someone to be terrified of, right? It rambled through Chechens and gays and on, right? But there was always a way he could be on TV and say, "Be terrified right now," which puts you on tilt, right? It stops you from saying, "Is this the best president for me? Is the economy what I want it to be?" Instead, you're just like, "Oh God, the Chechens! Vote Putin!" Right? And it feels like that's the model. It feels like this is Fox News similarly seems to resolve every story with a quick emotional, either wonderful or terrible, hero or villain, as opposed to this being a commander and assessing the lay of the land and being rational and reasonable and slow. It's always quick, and fear.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. If you can, and I apologize for the sirens. I'm in the middle of New York. There are lots of them. Okay, perfect. I think that the model is always, if I can make my opponent act quickly, if I can destabilize their decision process, if I can make it so that they feel like it's a hot emotional situation, that immediacy is of great importance, then all of a sudden I've won, because that is the opposite of rationality. That is when we're emotional, we're not rational. When we think, oh my God, I need to act now, all of a sudden a lot of our logical processes go out the window. My last book was about con artists. This is what con artists do to try to get people to make bad decisions. They force that, act now, or they give you the fear that, the police are coming, and if you don't do this, they're going to get you. They really just make it so that you feel like you need to act immediately. And this can be both negative, which is what you're talking about with Putin, or positive, this offer's going away, scarcity, this only 10 people in the world are going to get this rare bottle of wine and you can't get any more. So you need to buy it from me now if you want this Petrus from, whatever year. I don't know which vintage was good, but pick a good vintage.
I thought you said you don't write about politics.
Sometimes I do.
Sounds like it.
So I think that this is it's a technique that not just Putin, that leaders have been using for centuries. That's why I'm actually terrified that our orange orangutan is going to start a war, a big one.
Oh yeah.
Because that's a way, if your rankings are falling, that's a really good way to make people vote for you. So let's go back in history. FDR, the only president we've ever had who was a 3-term president. And they didn't even write that shit into the Constitution because they were like, oh, no one's ever going to go for a 3rd term because, George Washington and precedent and, gentleman's agreement and all this stuff.
Right.
And that worked for a little while. Then along comes FDR, and he's, I'm not trying to say he was a bad president. FDR did a lot of amazing things for the country. And yet, why did he win a 3rd term? Because he had the argument, I've been with you through this war. You don't want to switch presidents right now. You want to keep me in office. And so he ran and he was elected for a 3rd term. And I'm doing this on purpose, picking a president we all see positively to show that it's not like just villains do this. Right. Everyone does this. It's a very politically savvy thing to do. How do I stay in office? There's a war going on. And granted, he didn't start this war and he didn't want to go into this war. So it's the parallels are not the same. But still.
Great point.
So I think we need to realize that this is a very, very effective tool. It's been in social psychology, one of the best things you can do to get people to kind of suddenly be on your side is to create them and us, to create in groups and out groups. And they can be based on just completely bullshit things like, oh, we had you all do this task and you guys are the high counters and you guys are the low counters. And this is a really great psychological characteristic that this is what it means about you. And here's a little readout. The professor just created low and high counters. It doesn't exist. And there was they weren't measuring anything in the task, but all of a sudden you're nicer to the low counters and you don't like the high counters quite as much. And now if I put you in a competitive situation, you can really play on these dynamics, and nothing like the fear of the Chechens or whatever it is to get you to say, oh, well, at least the president is one of us.
Right. Have you read this book, Moral Tribes? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I haven't read it, but I know what you're talking about.
It's I read it and no one else I know has read it. And if I walk around in life wanting to find people who to talk and discuss it with, because it's kind of what you're talking about, basically like within your tribe, people who are raised like you with your traditions, you have a very satisfying emotional feeling from like one set of rules. Then the problem comes when you're trying to amalgamate tribes, like almost by definition, the rules that are the optimal ones don't feel emotionally satisfying to almost anyone. Right? Yep. So this is where like wearing a mask, like in America, feels off. No one's like, this is how I was raised. This is like the Boy Scouts. Like it doesn't come with this like cultural trappings of comfort, right? But it's the right thing to do, right? The right thing to do just feels a bit odd. And he's basically articulating that like it's all the right answer is almost always like that. It's almost always something you have to like, okay, I guess that makes sense. But
yeah, for sure. And you need to be willing to do the work. And oftentimes the more emotionally gratifying thing is to just say, fuck it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, wearing masks is uncomfortable, but you know what? Losing a life is not uncomfortable. It's unconscionable. So let's weigh the moral calculus here. And let's, I just want to get, maybe you guys can help me with this. I want to get just thousands of t-shirts printed that say, just wear a fucking mask and have a picture of the mask worn correctly over your nose and your mouth. Because you have no idea how many I see like this.
Oh, we have an idea. We have an idea.
And I am in New York, we are at, in the heart of the beast. Yeah. But yeah, there's so many, I want that t-shirt and I want to just wear it all the time. So that's why we need a few different designs and colors. I think it could be a great idea.
I've written those exact words on Facebook so many times. Just wear a fucking mask.
Yeah. So why don't we just have a uniform so that everyone without a mask, we can just be like, look.
Right. That's great.
Yeah. That'll go well. I was going to ask you, I got to ask you, I think you read this Tillman Fertitta data dump
Yes,
thing we
I
published
did.
last week. I imagine it kind of connects to a lot of things you're interested in, but I'd love to know your.
Oh, absolutely. It was such a funny piece to me because, so my last book was about con artists, and I had a podcast about con artists. This book is about poker, and obviously the Fertittas are very involved in poker right now. And I did this thing for the New Yorker a few years ago about our fascination with the mob, where I had a chance to spend time with a lot of the old mob families. People who've been in that world forever. And so I was reading your piece, and it just was everything coming together all in one. And it's just, first of all, everyone, I'm glad that Judy brought up a screenshot of it. It's fascinating. You should read it if you didn't take the time to read it. But it just shows how, I mean, there is a lot of overlap with these worlds. And a lot of the time, people are willing to look the other way for some reasons. And I wouldn't say for the right reasons, but for the right reasons, we'll look the other way and we'll overlook these things. And
Oh yeah,
wow, Judy is good.
It's so much better when Judy's here.
Yes, right. That I wrote that. And it's so funny because we do have this, mobsters almost get a carte blanche in the US, and a lot of it has to do with their history. So they really came to power here during Prohibition, and so they were the good guys. They were the guys giving us alcohol when the government was the bad guy. And so people are like, yeah, they're for the people. And there were a lot of moments like that. And then, they brought gambling when people wanted that. So there were a lot of moments that made the public actually much more willing to look the other way. It's not like other types of criminals that were always looked down on. And so it's so interesting to see that, the more things change in a way.
Yeah. There's one part of it, I wonder if you have any thoughts about this. Why are they so commonly with like girls, like dancing girls or prostitutes? Like, why, do you know what I mean? Like, there's something very male dominant about the mob. And actually I think there was another New Yorker article about the women who like kind of ratted out their families. But and I think of this a little bit. Tony Spilotro was one of the like real big names and swirled around this Fertitta story. And in this one podcast, they're talking about basically like he almost certainly murdered a whole bunch of people. And his lawyer was Oscar Goodman, who became the mayor of Las Vegas, whose wife is the mayor right now. And I met Oscar Goodman at an NBA event when it was in Las Vegas. And there's Oscar Goodman going around with David Stern. But Oscar Goodman has two like in uniform dancing girls with him. That's how he rolls in. I'm just, what is it about? Why do those things go together?
So now our conversation has come full circle to the big swinging dicks.
Yes.
So what are the external markers of big if if you're not,
I'm very afraid to listen to this. I don't want to be one of those guys.
if you're not able to actually be in their place of work. So the way that it worked for Michael Lewis is everyone knew who the big swinging dicks were because their names were announced over the loudspeaker, and they had made all of these, deals. And so they were like, yeah, that's me. I can now do whatever the hell I want. In the mob, you can't be like, yeah, I'm a big swinging dick. Like, have you seen the number of people I killed? Like, yeah, that's me. Like, I did that shit. Like, you better respect me. No. Like that, there's also a code. There's omerta. You're loyal. You do not talk about these things. So how do I signal to the outside world that I'm a big swinging dick? So it's nice to kind of hint that you're made, but not actually say it, right? So that you can dress a certain way, you can have certain types of cars, you can go to certain types of places that are associated with people of a certain kind. In New York, so let's go away from the mob for a second. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if you were in the media, you needed to have lunch at Michael's, because that was the place that signaled that you've made it. So you knew the places that you went. That was how you signaled, I'm now a big swinging dick of media because I can afford to take people here and be seen. And now there's also this calculus of which table do I get? All of this stuff. Now if I'm swinging enough to get that table, well, I must really be a force. For the mob, the places, the cars, the women.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the kind of guy that can get girls like this on my arm, different ones all the time. I've got hundreds of them. You don't like these two? Look, got some more. They're totally, and I don't care about them. They're replaceable. They're there to show that I'm a big swinging dick, and for no other reason whatsoever. And because I'm willing to discard them like that, that shows that I have even more power.
Now we're talking about the president again. So we traditionally end the show with Gerard, who's also quarantined in New York, will join us and ask better questions than David and I asked during the course of the show. It's just how it goes. So I think
good.
Judy, do I have to do that? Or maybe Gerard did.
Yeah,
He's there. Perfect. Yay, there's Gerard.
There I am.
Hey.
How are you, Maria? This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much. I love your background.
Oh, yeah. So I'm pretending I'm in Paris still.
Nice.
That is, yeah. Although you got some guys who clearly aren't social distancing back there, and that's from January. So
okay, so it's all good.
Poker is such a fascinating world to me. I had someone who I know who that's how he makes his career, but does it online, right? And whenever he would go to live tournaments, would inevitably just struggle, but online would kill it, right? And a lot of, I'm sure, is what you talked about with this online. You don't really have those kinds of those situations that you do in person. The dudes aren't sitting around me. They're not calling me, whatever. I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of chat feature or whatever. But
yes, there is.
Yeah, right? So whatever, and just keep doing your thing. And that, to me, I wonder, obviously you have to have skill to play at a professional level or else you're not. But how much of it is, okay, the skill, that's fine. You need to have that at a certain level. But if you are a master of the mental game and a master of the tricks and the either to comport yourself that Phil Ivey to me is someone who's kind of like I lock in and like whatever. I'm like, you never know what he's thinking. Or I'm going to go so extreme the other way, and that always works. Like, how much of it is that part of it versus the skill to play?
So I have to tell you, I have to kind of find a little fault with that dichotomy. I think that that's a huge skill. I think the mental game is a huge skill. I think that, like, being able to Phil Ivey, your opponent's like, holy shit, that dude has skill. Like, that is just, to lock in, to be able to do that. It's just a different type of skill. So I think it's both. And I think you need to figure out, and it's different for every single player. So if you want to play at the top level, what you need to do is figure out, where is my strength? What am I actually good at? So I took my last math class in high school. The statistics are never going to be my strong suit. Yeah, I can calculate pot odds. I can figure out, what, I can do that. But you have to. And I think it's very stupid to think you don't need one or the other. There are also the guys who are just GTO wizards and who say, I don't need any of that other, like, Phil Ivey bullshit. I don't need to know how to stare at people down or read that because I don't need that. I've got such strong math. Both of those approaches are wrong. Right? You need both. And Phil Ivey knows you need both. He's a brilliant player. And, my coach, Eric Seidel, knows you need both. But you need to, different players, the balance changes because you want to use your strength. What's going to really set you apart? And then you supplement it with the other stuff. So for me, my strength was definitely the psychology. That's what I studied. That's what I know. So I'm going to use that. That's going to be my main edge. But I also damn well better get the math right, and learn what the GTO guys are trying to do. So I bought solver technology so that I could, run these simulations and, run PO solver and figure out, well, okay, what is this approximate thing tell me that I should be doing with what frequency? And I really do my best to understand that. But I know that it's never going to be like, that is not where my bread and butter is. But I need to know it. At the highest levels, you need to know all of this. And so for me, I chose psychology. But then you have some other people who are just, math wizards. You've got stats PhDs who are professional poker players. For them, they know that the GTO, that's their edge. They're not going to be as good at picking up the dynamics of people. That's not what they studied. It's not what they care about. That's not what interests them. And so they're going to try to do it a little bit, when they can, but really they're going to be mainly guided by that other approach. So I think that, we go back to something that we're kind of talking about, not in these exact words throughout the conversation, self-knowledge. You need to know yourself. You need to take time to identify, where are you coming from? What makes you tick? What are you good at? What are the things you need to work on? And go from there. I think that's so important, both to avoid tilt, but also to play the most skilled game you can.
I do wonder, right? I mean, so much of it seems like if you're a really good liar, that probably helps, right?
Oh.
Like, if you lie really well and not have a tell, that's probably really good.
Sure, but I think that people underestimate just how good most people are at lying. Like, we lie all the time. I mean, white lies are what make social interactions possible. So most people have a really decent poker face, because you don't want the person who you're saying, oh, hey, it's so nice to see you, to be like, oh my God, she hates me. Okay. Yeah, right? You want that to go off without a hitch. And so we actually have a good amount of practice at those kinds of small deceptions, because do you really want to be a nasty person? Be like, no, it's not good to see you. Actually, I can't stand the sight of your face. I don't know what's happened to your hair, but it looks like shit. And just stop talking to me. That's a problem if you're actually that type of person. And so I think that people overvalue the poker face. But yes, you're absolutely right. So one of the things that I learned from my last book about con artists was that someone is just used to deceiving on a very high level all the time. It is really hard to tell what they're doing, even if you're trained at spotting deception, even if you're someone who has spent years training how to see this. If you meet a psychopath, if you meet someone who is just at the top, it doesn't even have to be a psychopath, but someone who just lives the lie, all of a sudden to them, it's not a lie. Right. They believe it. And so, yeah, I think that with poker players, the ones who are the best and who understand bluffing, that's where the math actually comes in. That's actually where the math has been most helpful to me, because when I look at all those solver things and try to figure out how did the solver find the bluffs, and once I understand that, I'm like, oh, this is good strategy. And so next time I'm doing it, I know exactly why I'm doing it. And so I'm not like, oh my God, I'm bluffing. I think I'm just executing good strategy, and it helps me stay calm. It helps me pull it off, because when I don't believe it, then people can see it.
Yeah.
We're just about out of time, Maria, but tell me, you're doing something with David Epstein tomorrow, which I'm sure
yes.
we're going to want to see. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So my book is out tomorrow, and I'm doing my launch event with David Epstein, and it's going to be over Zoom. And if you go on either one of our Twitters, we've shared the event, and I'm going to tweet it out again today. It's at 7:00 Eastern time tomorrow. Okay. It's free, but you do have to pre-register. So no one who hasn't you can't just show up at 7. So if you want to do it, which I highly recommend, because David is just not just one of my favorite human beings of all time, which he is. He's just extraordinary, but he's such a brilliant thinker. Honestly, just watch it for him, not for me. You've already heard enough from me. But he's so wonderful, and I'm so grateful that he's doing my launch with me. So join us.
I thought that your launch was last week, and so I texted David asking for advice on things to ask you about. And he's basically like, I'm talking to her on Tuesday. Like, so, so he's cooking something up.
Come on, Henry Hoop. Come on, Henry Hoop.
Is there going to be drinking, or are you going to be stone cold sober at 7 p.m. tomorrow evening?
I am happy to have to toast everyone who signs into my launch event. So, and I encourage you. I always encourage people to have fun. Okay, I mean, perfect. This is not an ideal time to be putting a book out, but I'm doing my best. So, yeah. So I hope that everyone who joins along also just has a good time.
It's super amazing. I read to page like 90 maybe, but I'm definitely going to finish. It seems fascinating. Thank you for all the beautiful thinking and hard work and sharing it with us. And we'll buy your t-shirts soon.
Yeah. Yes. Well, you guys are going to help me with that. I'm not good at that.
Wear your fucking mask.
Wear a fucking mask, people. Yeah. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Maria.
This was a lot of fun. Bye, everyone.
Be safe.